Here we are.
All right. Hey, what's up, everyone?
Hey, guys.
Hey.
How are you doing, man?
Doing well, man. How you doing, Nick?
Good. Do you have some feedback?
No, I'm clear over here. Are you good?
Yeah, I've got major feedback.
Oh, no.
That's weird.
All right. Can everyone out there hear us? Yeah, you're good. So there's a chat over there down in the bottom right corner. Feel free to hop in there and chat amongst each other. And we'll also be kind of monitoring the chat as we go through the webinar. There is a question option that's ask a question at the bottom of the screen. So we're going to have a lengthy Q&A session that's going to be going on at the end of this. So in the ask a question section down at the bottom, make sure you go in there, drop in a question, and you can also upvote questions as well. So if you see a question that's similar to yours, just go ahead and upvote that one, and we're going to jump into that. So overall, I think the presentation will probably be about 45 minutes long, and we'll probably have about the same amount of time for the question and answers. We want to make sure that everyone out there can really be able to participate and get their questions answered and interact in the chat and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm just going to jump in and talk about what this is and who we are and what we'll be covering. So my name is Ryan Wheaton, and I own Craft Brew Creative, which is a branding and design studio focused on the craft beer market. And I am also the host of the Branding Brews podcast. So if you're not familiar, if this is kind of your thing, definitely check out the Branding Brews podcast. I have over 40 episodes. They're about an hour long each, focusing on specific topics that go into branding for beer. So definitely check that out if you haven't done that already. So the title of this is called Freshly Wrapped, an inside look at branding strategies, label branding strategies, excuse me. And this was originally featured at the California Craft Summit, which is a conference that's put on by the California Craft Brewers Association. And it went really well. So we thought, why not take this to a bigger audience and do it in this webinar format, so everybody can attend and interact with each other, have a longer question and answers session. And so overall, what happened was we paired with two breweries. One was in Sacramento, one was in Southern California, in Long Beach. And what we did is we worked with them for about 4 months, developing their brand strategy geared towards developing a core beer line. So they both happened to be 16-ounce cans, but it was going to be their core beer products, not necessarily one-offs or seasonals. We did take that into consideration, but essentially it's going to be their core product. So we did a lot of brand development with these breweries, and then transitioned that to be a wrap to go around a 16-ounce can. So we documented that whole process, and that's what we're going to cover here today. So I've introduced myself. So let's get Nick back up here again. And Nick, why don't you kind of give yourself an introduction, and then we're going to jump into the presentation part of it. Nick's going to start us off there.
Cool. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is a blast. And thanks for you, Ryan, for putting this together and having me be a part of it. It's been fun. So we got to do this a while back, and really excited to kind of share what we did with these two brands. My background is I have a design agency here in Los Angeles called Longo Designs, mostly in the beer, beverage, and restaurant industries. And I also teach at Cal State Northridge, teach design and branding there, which is a fun little side gig. And just like Ryan, I do a few podcasts as well, one called Deeply Graphic Design and one called Creative Course. So that's a little bit about me. I think we're going to go right into this, and I'll start sharing the screen, and I think we're ready to go. All right. Perfect. Are we seeing the screen there?
Let me see. I see. There we go.
You're all good?
Yeah, so excuse us. This is our first time using Crowdcast. It's a pretty awesome platform, but we're trying to work out the kinks here, but it looks like we got
it. Perfect. Okay. So this first area here is we're going to talk a little bit about the agenda, and we're going to go over some of the stuff here. We're going to show the objective that we had in mind. We're going to give you a little insight into our project discovery, what we do to kind of dig deep and figure out what particularly the brand and the brewery need to be executed into their packaging. We're going to get into the visual inspiration and kind of like our gut reaction. I know it says guy reaction. So we will get into that a little bit. And then the competitive analysis. How will this look compared to the competitors and the brands that are around you? And then we're going to get into our initial concepts and everything we did. So our objective, we want to showcase how important it is to do the brand strategy when you're developing your core lineup. So it really makes a difference for your brand to look and sing together when they're on shelves. And we're going to show you how we did it with these two companies and hopefully show you how important it is to get through there. So this is a great quote. If you're not a brand, you are just a commodity. And you just don't want to be a basic good. You don't want to be a beer that someone considers basics. You want to have your brand sing and really show off who you are. Being yourself is the way to go, because truly everything else, everyone else is taken. Don't follow, don't copy, be yourself. When you look at the brands, I'm sure there's in any industry that you are a consumer of, you are picking brands based on the fact that how they're telling a story to you. So for us, we want to make sure that we're doing that for breweries as well. And hopefully this will show you a little bit about how we did it. So the brand strategy includes three main important things. It's your vision, your values, and your story. And I'm going to go a little bit into these to show you what we mean. Think of vision as a crystal ball. It's your brand and where you want it to be in the future. So if you are a new brewery, great. You can start thinking about this now. If you're an existing one and you haven't done this, it's never too late to establish exactly who you want your business and your brewery to be. So then there's your values. These are kind of the things that you stand for. They're the core principles that will never change. So these are the things that if you're looking at yourself and saying, you know what, we are a very creative brewery, or we're a family-oriented brewery, or we're all about eco-consciousness, whatever the area or the theme is, these are those things that you can't really make up. You just want to make sure they're true to you and why you started your brewery. And then there's your story. The story is truly important. Everyone has one. There's a reason you started your brewery. So figure out what it is, and hopefully working with a designer and a brand specialist, you can really pull out what that brand story could be. If it's all about you being appealing, being informative, being innovative, maybe there's a really cool story about how you started with the rest of your team. Let that be the cornerstone of what your brand's going to be. So the core design advantages. Why do you need to make your core lineup designed in strategy? One, it's going to make a very strong brand statement, especially out there when it's on shelves, even out of your brewery. Because specifically, if you think about it, no one's there to sell it. It's got to do it on its own. So you want to make sure it's bold and it stands out and it makes a statement. It's got to be easily identifiable, and it has to break through the clutter, everything else that's out there. And also you want to just highlight the beer varieties that you are doing. So think about how easy you want them to understand that. And I think statistics are showing that people really gravitate to the beer type first, and then they want to see, because they know their taste and they know what they're looking for, but then the brand and everything about you as a brewery really shine. So here's a great example, and it's not even beer. This is San Pellegrino, and look at what a difference this has on the shelf. When you do a core lineup that really has unique values, similarities, and changes per flavor or variety, you've made basically what we consider a store within a store. So the brand is very visual, and you can see it from far away, and you'll be lured in to say, what is this? Let the other stuff kind of blur off to the side. Really make sure your brand stands alone. Here's a set that Ryan did. And again, you can see that there's instant brand recognition. You can see that there's a common thread. In his, he's got a similar trade dress at the bottom. And you can see that the changes in typography and patterns change, but there's still a core structure that allows for them to play differently, but come together as one brand. This is one that I did for a local brewery out here, and this was for a limited edition set. So you can think about this as whatever category of beer you're putting together, let this be an exercise you can do. This wasn't for core beer. This was for their seasonals that come out 5 different ones per year, and it was like a limited release collection. So you can see how it's similar, but it changes specifically for each one. So we're going to go into the first case study that we did, and we were paired up with a fantastic brewery out here in Long Beach, California, called Trademark Brewing Company.
Nick, can I hop in real quick?
Yes.
Right on. So yeah, I forgot to mention before to kind of set the stage for these 2 separate case studies. The first one that Nick is doing, Trademark Brewing, they are a brand new brewery. They had the core branding completed, so they had like their logo, they had some graphical elements, along with that, but they hadn't done any packaging yet. So this is a unique case study for Nick in that it's a brand new brewery. It's never done packaging. So that's his situation. When I get into my case study for Big Stump Brewing, they are an established brewery. They've been around for about 3 years. So they're 2 totally different case studies, which is nice to be able to do a kind of comparison about how we handled a new brewery versus handled a brewery that has an existing brand, and how we developed those packaging. One last thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of this is if you're a graphic designer and you are independent, you're not working at a brewery, we do have a special designers session that's going on tomorrow at the same time, where we're going to get a little bit into more of the behind the scenes of the design process, working with brewery clients. So if you're a designer that's independent, not working at a brewery, you can go to brandingbrews.com, click on the webinar tab, and we have a session tomorrow at the same time just for designers. Want to make sure that was out there. Take it away again, Nick. Thanks.
You got it, man. All right. First thing we do, if we sat down, met with the owners of Trademark, and I like to give them my brand questionnaire. And as Brian said, they were established and they did have a brand kind of put together, little bits and pieces here and there, but they hadn't taken it and put it together in a particular story on packaging where, again, it was going to sell the brand outside of the brewery. So this is the beginning of what I give to a new client. And hopefully these are those questions you as a brewery owner should be going through to start thinking about what your brand's going to look like. So it's very simple stuff. What is your brand values? What do you hold true as a brand? And in plain English, what is your brand? What do you offer? These are some other questions. Thinking about specifically who your target consumer is. Are you going after that beer aficionado, that person that just loves unique things, loves to see different collaborations? What is that thing that you are striving for, right? What role should your brewery play in a consumer's life? Is it going to be a place to come and hang, have community, you name it? Is it a neighborhood bar? All of these things. You want to make sure you are getting all of this down in writing. Describe some of your competition. You want to know who you're competing against. That way a brand designer, a graphic designer can help you kind of stand out and be different. One thing I love to ask too is this bottom question: what emotions should your brand evoke? And that should be as simple as, enthusiastic, curious. Is it scientific? It's one of those things to kind of help decide who your brand's going to be. This is a big, big advantage. And ever since I started using this with my clients, I'm seeing a huge difference because it's allowing us and every stakeholder in your brewery to understand who you're going to be. And it's called brand archetypes. A great note here is if you want to just jot down to search brand archetypes, just do a quick Google and you'll see what I'm talking about, but I'll go into it a little bit here and how we used it. Think of a company just as a person. Every company should have a personality just as much as anybody you know, right? And yourself. So determine how your consumer is going to connect with you. These are some great examples. Look at Nike. They consider themselves the hero. everything they do is heroic. It's helping you with fitness and lifestyle. Apple is the creator, right? Virgin is the rebel. Perfect example. Everything they do is a little bit different than the competition, kind of 180, you know? Skittles is the jester, right? It's a little bit jovial. It plays jokes. And then Disney, the magician. Everything they do is magic. So think about who you could possibly be in there. There's 12 main ones. These are them here. But if you do a little bit of research, you'll see there's a lot more. And it's really fun to work with you and your other stakeholders in the company and see if you guys are aligned with this, especially if you're an existing brewery. Where are you? For trademark, we decided they were going to be the creator. And what the creator means is they're innovative. They just imagine, they create all day. They're inspirational. They're a bit daring. They're provocative, but they see potential everywhere, right? They want to uncover originality, and they love everything about imagination. Here's some fantastic examples. Lego, Apple, Adobe, all these companies that help the creator or are the creator. So that's how they saw it. They want to be imagination driven. They want to be a little daring in their approach and in their voice. So this was good to know. So now that we're going to design it, I want to make sure the client and myself have an agreed upon idea of where to go. So when we asked the questions, did our brand archetypes, these were the 4 fundamental, what I call brand ethos. So everything should revolve around this. Think of it as the lens. This is how you're going to evaluate anything your brewery does from this point on. So for them, it was bold elegance, subtle sophistication, innovation with a foundation of tradition, and elevated appeal. So we can now look at anything we design for them and say, does it match up to this? You know, are we subtle sophistication? Are we bold? Is there a slight elevated appeal? They didn't want to go too luxurious or too high end, but this was a thought to keep it in that zone. So we did the look and feel with competitive samples out there. These were what I thought were good, elevated personality without being too uncreative, because obviously we were going with the creator thing. So I want to show them some ideas of maybe the wheelhouse we're going to start exploring in. You're going to see a little less is more. You're going to see very structured layout, easily identifiable, but a touch of creativity, right? Some of these have some really beautiful artistic value to them, as well as being a core beer brand. So what I'm going to do at this point is I go right to a sketchbook. I start messing around with some ideas. I just want to get pen on paper to see how this brand can start aligning. And I love that they had this little hexagon icon that became the cornerstone of everything we designed. And it's really nice because it's structured, but it also allows a little playfulness. And you'll see that in what we did. So went right into concepts. This is what I presented to them to see which one was their favorite and which one we would go explore for the final one. So this is option 1. What I like to do is show it on the can. I want to show it 3D. When you show flat art, sometimes it's a little hard for you, a non-creative, to really understand and articulate what the design's going to look like when it's wrapped on a can. I like to give some call outs as to why things are there, what's the rationale. So we did this first one. You can see we even incorporated a little bit of an organic feel with the waves, paying a little respect to the fact that they're right near the beach in Long Beach, California. And then I show that what will change per beer variety. So in this case, it would be the green area would change and the name for each different beer down the road. This was option 2. Again, trying something a little different, trying to understand, like, you know, the creator might try something a little off what they see in the competitors. So we had this idea to do a vertical trade dress here with the logo and then float the hexagon patterns in different color formats, and then allowing for a really simple way to identify and know that this is the ascending percussion. We know exactly what beer variety it is. It has some notes as far as the ABV and the IBU. This was number 3. Again, playing off the hexagon idea and almost trying to point the direction down into Trademark Brewing's name. Being a new brewery, we thought maybe this would be a nice way to kind of tell a story. You know what beer it is, what is the brand, see some color, and then go right into the brand identity at the bottom. And then
Quick
the last
question.
one was kind of the more, I call it the rebel. This one was very different. It's always good to try something a little bit off the mission here. But for me, it was just fun to try something a little bit off. Again, play with the angles. Those hexagons definitely help establish exactly what you want to do. So this was the winner. We went with the option 2, and it had this really cool vertical thing. I'm seeing it in other beer. It's not like it's 100% original and no one else is doing this, but there was something very unique about this where when it's centered properly and it looks like this, it throws it off a little bit. You kind of go, oh, what is that? And it might just be different enough to grab their attention. So we go right back into the flat art, and this is where we build everything else. So you've got to get all of your warning, your UPC, any supporting logos or Beercraft LA, which is something unique out here, the independent beer logo, some tasting notes. And now you start to think, how does this work? How's it going to wrap all the way around? So we keep evolving, and this was version 2. And we were like, well, maybe we got to add some colors to the side and mess around with the entire layout, because you want to make sure as it goes around the entire can, this is a 360 piece. So where the seam meets, you want to make sure there's some continuity. So one thing I like to do is I just print out very quick paper, and we did this with the client, quick tape, put it on a few cans, and that way we're able to see how it looks. So it helps us kind of establish, are we doing this right? Is it going from flat to 3D, and is it doing it successfully? So here was the final flat. You can see we added a lot more color, because I think someone at this point said, you know, we promise being the creator. So let's get a little more color in there. Let's get a little bit more vibrancy. And the beautiful thing here is we knocked out the white ink behind the cells. And what's happening is you're getting the aluminum of the can, and it almost adds a really cool little jewel tone effect to all of the different cells. Because we were thinking too, they have a beautiful arts district around them, and you can see how beautiful that's photographed. And you think ahead, and you think of Instagram, and you think of people sharing your brewery online. Give them proper tools, give them great cans to hold up and shoot a picture of that's going to be memorable. So that was the goal with this. We kept thinking about sharing and making sure that people would see this and be like, wow, what is that colorful new can we keep seeing? So here's the 4 final core lineup. You can see what changes. You can see too, we changed the hierarchy there a little bit. We wanted the name of the beer, meaning like juicy IPA or hazy IPA, a little bit stronger, because we're finding people want to see that immediately. Don't hide it. Don't confuse them. They want to know, they know what they like. So they want to know, do you have that beer for them? So we made sure that was really important, but the rest of it has this beautiful color palette, really sparks attention, grabs people's attention. And it has this just beautiful common thread, but yet totally different because of the colors and what we did. So that's kind of the rundown of how we did that. And I will stop sharing the screen here.
Right on.
Perfect. And that's
Awesome.
kind of our run through with what we did. So I'm going to have a sip of beer.
Yeah, buddy. So I do have a question for you, Nick, if you don't mind. So I'd like to, and I think it'd be useful for people to know what elements that were on the can came from the original brand package that they had created before they got going. Like, was the hexagon pattern, like, was that anything, or like, what did you create basically?
They had experimented with it in a few different pattern varieties and formats. And it was something that was on a file that was never executed or used. The only other thing that was legit was the lockup of their logo. So luckily they had picked a very contemporary, solid sans serif font and a nice readable script. So that became kind of the cornerstone of what we used everything after that. But it still had the flexibility to do something as unique and different with some of those, and play off the idea that, wow, I didn't want to like take it to a whole other level and take a tangent off of what they've already like.
Yeah.
But they were so welcoming to see that we can play around with this, and liked the idea of expanding it just a few steps more.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great, like, I think there are a number of breweries, especially with mobile canning these days. There are a lot of breweries out there that are just getting into packaging for the first time. Or maybe they're transitioning from bottles, which are not quite as popular now, to the can format.
Yes.
So I think that your case study here is nice to show how you could take just kind of core branding elements from the brewery and how would you translate that into a packaging format. And the way you explore that in different scenarios, I think is really useful in that sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. And it was a challenge because usually we start from scratch and really help the brand from the very beginning, even help them name the brand. So
Yeah.
they came in so prepared, but yet willing to try different things and new things. So
Yeah.
to me, that's like best case scenario, right?
Yeah.
I think it's also a good lesson for any brand owner, brewery industry, whatever industry, to not be too precious with your brand. You know, you want to be passionate. You want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward, but be open to the ideas that anybody you hire, specifically if it's someone you trust and you've started a great camaraderie with, that listen to them, like listen to what others say, take tests with people, show 2 or 3 options to people, and don't let it be personal preference, because it's really your consumer. That's the one that's going to be buying it, and their decision.
Right. And I remember that also in this seminar, we actually had the brewers, the owners of the brewery there, which is nice. And I remember them saying that they were really kind of opened up to the idea of these brand ethos, and that you came up with a brand archetype, that they had developed a brand, but they hadn't really explored that yet. So that was something new for them that they, I think, found valuable, that they were able to kind of take into use into their other marketing and other branding aspects.
They definitely are. And even in all of their Instagram posts. And so now we're doing the tap handle design. And what's nice is it's making this perfect little, connected to what we did with the cans, and they go hand in hand together, which is beautiful.
Yeah. And the trademark brewery building had this big marquee that was like a big blade sign that went up down the side, right? And so you translated that to the can. So when you see the can and you look at the actual brewery, you're going to make that visual connection, which is going to reinforce the brand even more, right? Yeah,
they had found such a beautiful old abandoned building that they converted, and it originally had this vertical blade sign on there, and that's how they put trademark on there. So how cool to like mimic it on the can as well. So when someone's outside and they hold it up again, there's that moment that someone can capture and do some free advertising for you on their Instagram account.
Instagram ability is huge, right? Yeah. Sweet. All right. Well, I'm gonna jump in here.
Perfect.
Jump over to my case study here, which was for Big Stump Brewing Company. Again, they're based out of Sacramento, California. So this was an established brand. They had been around for 3 years. They had really had minimal to, if any, I guess, branding work. They had basically a logo, and they created their own packaging. They were selling cans. The owner learned like Illustrator and put together some cans that they were selling, and they were doing well, but they didn't really have any brand story. They didn't really have much in the way of developing that backbone that was their brand. So this was really fun because, it was not developing a brand from the ground up, and in a way it kind of was. We were trying to find what are those core elements that they have and start building the brand based on that. So since they were established, I thought the best idea would be to create a kind of questionnaire, like a brand questionnaire that we gave to their patrons and to their employees. we kind of wanted to get an idea, kind of a finger on the pulse of like what other people and what the employees thought of their brand and of their breweries. So some of the questions we asked on that questionnaire were, if you were to describe Big Stump in one word, what would that be? Essentially, the idea here is to have these patrons and employees like distill the idea of their brand down to one word. And then we had them provide 3 examples of that. The cool thing about this is that that's really boiling it down to the essence. If you are like if you're a punk rock brewery and you ask somebody like, what's one word do you think describes this brewery, and they're like, oh, I totally get a surfing vibe, so surfer. That's completely you're way off base, right? So it's kind of a cool way to kind of get a pulse on the essence of what your existing brand is. Another question we asked the patrons was, what stands out to you most, or what is the coolest thing about Big Stump? Again, just kind of questions that are trying to draw out some information from people about what they think of this existing brewery brand. Another one we asked was, if a friend asked you, what is Big Stump like? How would you explain it? How would you describe to this person what the Big Stump brewery is like? Again, trying to get more kind of descriptors out there besides just that one word, or just trying to get some more feelings of boiling down the essence of what that brand was. And some of the key responses we got were family, friendly, quality, tasty, inviting, and welcoming. And this was kind of cool. This is really great for the owners to see because they really strive to create a welcoming environment. Of course, they strive for quality. I think everybody does, right? But it was nice for them to see the match between the customer's experience and what they were striving to do. So as we're going through this here, these are all just building blocks that are going to start to build up upon how we created this brand. So I'll kind of try to break that down a little bit as we go along here. So then we started kind of doing some stuff on brand positioning. We did numerous questions, very similar to what Nick did on his branding questionnaire. So these are more ways for the brewery to kind of develop their kind of core backbone to their brand. 2 of the questions I wanted to focus on here that I thought were kind of importance was, why does your brewery matter? And the answer that we got from the owners was that they thought that they had an inclusive and safe community space for Sacramento. They are good city ambassadors for visitors coming to work or for pleasure. We are a comfortable and intimate place for our locals. So they, I think, even had done this before they gotten the response back from the patrons. So that kind of shows how some of that alignment's there. So that was kind of nice. And then the next question that I thought was we pulled, that I kind of was pulling stuff out from to build this brand was, what role should your brewery play in your customers' life? And their answer was a place where people can come celebrate, to blow off steam, to meet with friends and family, a place where people want to be. So those were kind of some responses from the owners there. So this one is one I really like a lot. I feel like you can really easily, it's hard. I mean, even for me, who's somebody who does this kind of stuff, who kind of has my own business, to try to like have deep and thoughtful, insightful, creative things about who you are as a brand. Mm-hmm. It's really challenging. So some of these brand questions, like who are you and why? What are you doing? And it's really easy, I think, for people to just be like, oh, we make beer for everybody. We make beer that everyone wants to enjoy. And that is really not much of a descriptor. It's very like, yeah, right. I mean, is that every brewery?
Yeah.
So this one's called Start with the Why. This is a Simon Sinek TED Talk from the TED Network. He also evolved this into a book that became wildly popular. The YouTube video of this TED Talk has like 18 million views. And then Kodo Design also has a beer branding manual, and they kind of reference this idea as well. But I just really like it because it really helps the brewery owners distill down what, why they are who they like. Why you? Like, why in this crowded market are you running a brewery or starting a brewery? And some people think they know their why, but it ends up being like their what. or their how. So for instance, here we've got, and this is from Big Stump. They offer an elevated array of international beer styles. So that's their what, which you can see is on the outer ring. It's kind of, it's fundamental, but it's not like the target, right?
Yeah.
And then they had innovative brewing techniques, sour, and a barrel aging program. So that's kind of like how they do it.
Mm-hmm.
But, they thought that was like their why. They thought that's what, and this is other stuff's really important. So once they saw this and they watched that video, I think they really started to grasp developing it. They're like, why did they start the brewery? And it was important also for the brand. So the owner's name is Alex, and their response to this question of why was that Alex grew up in a foodie family, so that beer and wine had always been an interest. When Alex and Larissa were dating, they went to a lot of breweries together. So the brewery experience became a very enjoyable focal point of their relationship. Alex liked the idea that craft beer lifestyle values independence and creativity. So, again, so there's all these little tidbits here, right? That I'm trying to pull together and trying to create something, right? So the kind of key points that I took away from this was that they were wanting to have an inviting place where professionals and beer nerds, quote unquote beer nerds, and tourists can have an elevated beers in a comfortable, more casual atmosphere. Oh, sorry about that. Another key point was that the idea that the brewery is an experience and that can be a focal point of relationships. I really love this point because myself and my wife, like, when we first started dating, like, breweries was something we would do every time we travel. We'd be like, oh, let's go check out this new brewery. I love the idea of it kind of fostering relationships and a place where people go to like hang out and talk about stuff. So I wanted to pull that from the owners, how they met and how they did that as a key thing, and use that as well.
That's great.
Yeah, right. So another key point was that, so they're in downtown Sacramento, which is close to the state capitol. So there's like a lot of professionals, politicians and stuff that go to their brewery, to their tap room. So another key point we took away is that they wanted professionals, a spot where they can loosen up after work, and bring professional quality beer with them on life's adventures. So basically we wanted quality high-end beer because they do a lot of sours and a lot of barrel aging, but they wanted it to be approachable. They wanted it to be something where a professional could come in, loosen up their tie, roll up their sleeves,
Nice.
Feel like they're getting a really quality beer that kind of fits kind of their lifestyle. But then also, if it was Friday and they're going to drive up to Lake Tahoe, they're going to drive up to the mountains to go camping, they would be stoked to grab this can, bring it up, and like hand it to their buddies and be like, yeah, this is Big Stump. This is where, from my hometown. So those were kind of some key takeaway points. So all this work, you can really start writing this stuff out and exploring it, developing it further, and just really start writing notes. And in this way, or to start distilling it down and refining things. And through that process, you can start creating like taglines or slogans or marketing headlines or stuff for your brand. So these were nothing that we actually used, but just from all those points that I took away from this kind of research, I quickly threw together some kind of slogan ideas. And so I'll just run through these. So yeah, sour beers for sweet friends. We believe good beer can start great relationships. For the love of beer, beer for our loved ones. It's the beer that binds us.
You better trademark that one.
Trademark it, right? Yeah. Great beer for our best friends. So again, these were just kind of really quick. These didn't stick, but they did really like them, and they really liked seeing how we took stuff from their background and their story and started piecing it together and creating these slogans. So another thing that we did that worked, I think, really well that Nick touched on was developing brand personas. And you can approach this a couple different ways. You can approach it as if your brewery brand is a living and breathing person, what kind of clothes would they wear? Would they wear shorts? Would they wear jeans? What kind of shoes would they wear? Or do they wear like flip-flops, or sandals? Do they wear a hat? What kind of hat? Do they wear a watch? Do they drive a Subaru, or do they drive a BMW, or do they drive a Honda Civic? And so if you can start creating the idea of your brand as a person in this way, you can really start coming up with ways like how you would talk to that person. How would you market to that person? What kind of products would that person buy? And so we did that with Big Stump, and they kind of took a little different spin, which I think works almost as well, as that they decided to do their customer personas. I think this can also work really well because you are marketing to this customer, and they also had noticed a pattern of customers that came in and out of their tap room. So they interviewed their employees, and they kind of brainstormed like, who are our customers? And they essentially came down with like 3 of them. The professionals that get off, that work 9 to 5, they're white collar professionals. The kind of beer nerds because they have barrel aged and sour beers. And then they have tourists because, they're downtown Sacramento. So anyone that's there for tourism reasons, they're right in the heart of downtown. So when we built these personas, we really were able to start kind of distilling it down, and decided on the idea that we wanted to have a high quality looking beer, but yet it was approachable. So what I did was I started creating these brand style boards, similar to what Nick did towards the beginning. And I took the idea of this elevated yet approachable look, and I really started grabbing samples and taking it even further down into closer and closer niches. So this first one here I called it the Weekender. I can see any one of these, and these are existing brands that are out there. I can see somebody who gets off work, goes to a bottle shop, a grocery store, sees these, and like they're going camping, or they're gonna meet up with their buddies out at the lake or something. And these brands to me look elevated, but yet look like also like you can take them outdoors. If you're going on a mountain bike ride, you can pop one out of your backpack, and it feels very appropriate. So the other one I created was called, I call this I'm on a boat. And so this is these are a little bit more elevated, kind of almost have a look. I could see somebody on a boat drinking these, somebody who's out on the bay, who's out on the lake. They're very, they're very elevated, but, casual at the same time. Another one I created was called Modern Traditional. So a lot of script fonts, a lot of line work. It looks like it could be almost a traditional old school beer, but kind of in a more modern way. Again, kind of elevated yet approachable. So then we jumped into some market research. And I swear we're going to get to the design part of it here soon. But so I wanted to do some market research because, we want to make sure that we're going to stand out from our competitors. We obviously don't want to copy any of our competitors. So we just also wanted to get a landscape. And so these are all selections from the Sacramento area. And granted, these samples could be their core beers, or they could be one-off beers, but I still wanted to get an idea what the landscape look like here. So you can see it's kind of chaotic, right? I mean, with the exception of a few here, if you can see my cursor at the top right, there's a kind of a pattern here creating a billboard of a specific style that starts to kind of group together. Yeah. So we just wanted to take a look at all these kind of different ones. So what I did was then from all these competitors, we wanted to make sure that we were unique. So that was part of the reason why I did this market research of taking all these can images. And we also wanted to make sure that our colors were unique as well. And that we had a color palette that worked well. People call this color coding. And so I grabbed some series of cans that were, that kind of stood out, that looked like they were kind of a core lineup, or at least had a really strong branding system to create these series of beers that once you see one and you see another, you start recognizing, oh, this is this brewery. This is Claim Steak Brewery. And I went through and I sampled color palettes and kept these on file for when we started designing the cans for Big Stump. So yay, we just did a ton of brand strategy research and all this stuff, developing these kind of style boards. We picked the Weekender, by the way. That really seemed to fit with what they were thinking.
That got my vote, by the way.
Oh, right on, right on. And the nice thing about this too is that you're not just throwing darts at a dartboard. You've established the feel you want to have with it. You've established who the ideal customer is. And at this point, it's really just like, okay, how do we create a design that fits that? It's not just like, what do I think is cool? And the reason why that works so well is because trends change, right? Like in 6 months, what you think is cool, quote unquote cool, could be out of style and you may not like it. So if you're working with a designer and you're like, yeah, we're doing this core beer lineup, let's design it. And you start throwing concepts together, throwing them up on the wall, and you're like, oh, this looks really cool. And then 6 months later, you just might start falling out of love with it, or trends might have changed, and you might not just be like the cool kid on the block anymore. Or So this work really starts anchoring things to specific design elements, where something has a meaning. It's like, well, why did you use this font and this color? It's like, well, it ties back to the idea of like this and that, right? And so, so it was really great because then it just, things start fitting together. They start clicking because you're tying them to actual meaning and not just random what looks cool. So here was the first concepts I presented. Wanted to go with some elements of texture. Similar to Nick's, I wanted to use metallic colors. So the blue background of this was going to be a metallic blue, and elements were going to be solid, so they would have some depth to it. I kind of thought of like the look of like anodized aluminum or anodized metal. If you can think of like hiking poles that have like anodized colors, or mountain bikes often have colored anodized metal. So I kind of wanted to play a little bit on that. So just getting some textures in there, some really clean stuff, but then also a little bit of textures to kind of add to that a quality yet approachable look. Here was a second concept here. Playing a bit with the big stump, which was part of their logo, which we kind of worked on a little bit as well. Again, going with some of the metallic look. And again, here was the third concept. This one using two fronts of the can as it wraps, so you get a little bit more coverage on the kind of face of it. Especially since you don't know which way the can is going to be turned on the shelf. This is kind of a cool one if you've got the room to do two fronts. So then also it was really important. So we were just designing one core label for their beer lineup, right? And it's really important to start carrying this over, even if you're just doing one. If you know it's going to be a product line or a core beer line, to start carrying it over to these other ones to see how they look. So we wanted to see how the colors start looking together, how they stack together, like if they were on a shelf. So we started throwing these together, just quickly mocking up colors and color palettes to see how they look like. These top two were more or less just like kind of two colors for each label, just the background and the foreground. And the bottom one, we started introducing more colors. Blood orange, the wheat beer, they wanted to add some kind of different color. The more colors you get, the more complicated it gets, because coming up with two colors in a palette is easy enough, but starting to come up like 3 or 4, trying to stay within a palette gets really challenging. So then kind of started going down into the nitty gritty. We decided on what the label was going to be. Then it was like, okay, what font works the best at different sizes, with different formats, and what really says, quality yet approachable, the weekender, like what fits that. Again, exploring a bit more on the color coding, wanted to make sure these fit together well. This is one example of, so the and sign, the ampersand on the P and Q really did for this font, just was really not great. So, and this also starts introducing the idea of like, what happens if the name's short, like P and Q, or if it's like, Berliner Weiss, right? Something that's a really long word. So you need to figure out in your system, how is it going to fit? Are you just going to make it smaller and it's going to be really small? Or is it going to be big to fit up the same space? And so that's really something that's important to start mapping out, even if it's really quickly, just to start setting them up next to each other and seeing how you're going to format this, because you want to build a system that you can easily replicate and it's going to be solid. So if you're coming out with a new beer, boom, here it is. We just need to pick the appropriate color. We know how the format's going to be, and it's going to build a really strong brand in that way if you develop this system in full. So the final result. So this is kind of what we came up with. So the tree rings in the background and in the center are going to have metallic, and they're going to be the same exact color as the background, but they're just going to be a little metallic sheen to them. So you get this really subtle effect, a nice elegant effect, but they're in the tree rings, so it kind of ties to the kind of organic outdoor kind of feel to it. And this video does not play. So we had an animated video that we did where we showed how the cans look when they spin. And this is a really good thing you can do as well, just to get the view of how it looks when it spins. So yeah, that was the final result. Let me get rid of the screen sharing here. All right. Perfect. And it looks like we've got one question. We do have plenty of time. If you want to ask any questions, you can drop them in the chat. There's a chat thing down the bottom corner. There is one question here from Tyler. Thanks for the question, Tyler. Really appreciate it. And that is, how important would you say it is for having cohesion between your tap handles and your can labels? And Nick, I'll let you start since you kind of discussed that a bit.
Sure. I think he hit the key word there, the cohesion of it. I like to think there's a common thread between them. They shouldn't be like exact identical versions of each one, where you're repeating the same thing over and over again. And hopefully what your designer or your brand team can do, and Ryan and I are big advocates of this, you design a brand system, you design a logo system that has secondary unique little branding icons and crests, monograms, and these all work together so you can allow them to be used in different applications. I love to see that if the beer can and the tap handle are right next to each other, there's a common thread. There's something beautiful that kind of meshes between the two, but don't just take the same architecture and duplicate it on there. They're two totally different formats and applications. Also, too, I know with tap handles, what we usually have the challenge of is how you are using them when you send them to your accounts. So you want to make sure there's either an area for a pre-made label that talks about the particular brand and the variety of that beer. And it's very easy for the account to understand how to change that. So there's requirements with the tap handle that are different than the can. And that's why I think as long as you're keeping it in with the brand ecosystem and they have a familiarity, that's good enough for me. But I'm curious how you think too, because I think tap handles is a really fun area to mess around with the brand too. Because it's representing your brand in a whole other environment, some other business, Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah. And I'd like to keep doing more of these webinars. And I think tap handles is something I might have as a specific topic if I'm able to do that. I've done a lot of tap handles. And so essentially depends on what your branding is already. I've developed a lot of tap handles for breweries that have really no branding, maybe just a logo, mm-hmm. maybe one or two colors, but they don't really have a brand color palette. And then, so you really got to look at the situation. If you have existing can or bottle labels, that's something to consider. I would say that you should design your tap handle based on the brewery brand, or even based on the brewery tap room itself. And I'll explain that a bit more in a second. But what's really popular, so tap handles rotate often. And if you're not familiar with designing tap handles or, just in general, what's become really popular and really the most affordable for breweries is to design a tap handle that has a replaceable panel on it. It might be just a decal that you take off and just reapply a new one. Or it might be a plate that comes off that you add a new one to it. And so what a lot of people do is they'll design the entire tap handle based around the theme or the brand of the brewery itself, and then leave a panel where they can brand for the individual beers. So you can take artwork from a can or from a bottle label, slap it on that plate, and it's just like an element that's within the larger piece of the tap handle. And that makes it really easy and affordable for breweries to release new beers, just to switch out that tap plate, with the new beer name on it. And it gives you an element of branding the brewery with a big tap handle and then branding the beer with its own little area on the tap handle. I guess really quickly on that, if you don't have existing packaging, and or even really an extensive brand, visual brand. What I've done before, which can work well, is to get photos of the tap room, or if you work for them, hey, you can just go walk around and like, we use a lot of this like reclaimed corrugated metal, or we have a lot of copper or something, right? We painted this wall green. Maybe it's like, where we have these unique bar stools that have these legs that have like twisted metal on them or something, right? You can just start going around and taking note of like what are standout things about this brewery, because that's going to start building your brand too, is people's experience of your tap room.
Yeah.
And then you can take those elements and then integrate that into a tap handle, so that when the tap handle's outside of your tap room at a different account, like a tap room or a bar, somebody sees that. And if they've seen your brewery, they recognize like, oh yeah, like that green totally reminds me of that tap room or that brewery. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a great way as well. I guess lastly too, I'll say a lot of breweries that I've worked with, custom tap handles can take 4 or 5 months, and you can make really nice ones that are with stock tap handles. So they're a pre-cut shape, but you can totally customize the fronts and backs and even the sides of them. So again, you can design a certain area for the beer label, or like the brand of the beer, and then have the rest of it be designed around just the brewery itself. So yeah.
Yeah, I've also noticed how important the sides are too, because you're typically seeing the lineup of taps from an angle. And so sometimes it's like a great spot to put the brand of the brewery name on the spine on either side, and then allow that front to really be the characteristics of the brand, the beer variety, whatever it is, to kind of catch the attention. I'm glued to those anytime I go into a place now. I'm like, I'll snap a picture too, because it's neat to see which one stands up in a lineup of 10 to 15.
Yeah.
And that'll give you as a designer and a brand to figure out what's the way to kind of stand out amongst all those other competitors. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a good point. The sides are really important. Some tap handles are made as like a triangle. They're 3-sided.
Yeah.
So those are cool. You never know where the tap room. Yeah, they never know where they're going to leave it. Sometimes their taps are really close together, so they turn handles sideways anyway. In that situation, you're kind of just like, you don't have control over your own tap when it's outside of your tap room. And then there's also, I've worked with brewery clients that just wanted nice looking taps that were custom just for their tap room. In that situation, you may not want to go over the top with like branding on it, because they're already in the tap room. They already know where they're at. Like, you don't want this big, crazy, elegant tap handle, especially you can also consider like how they stack up next to each other, because that can get really busy.
Yeah.
So you want it to have it branded well. Just kind of like also with these cans, right, is when you stack them on a shelf, you want to look at the bigger picture. You want to see how they create a billboard, how they go together. Same thing with a tap handle. It's like if they start stacking them next to each other and it starts creating this visual mess and everything is crazy, then like that's actually gonna be hurting. It's not gonna be beneficial for you just in general. Yeah. So, all right. Thanks a lot for that question, Tyler. I appreciate that for sure.
I think that's a great example of how everything does need to tie in a way, and hopefully all this upfront kind of rationale and everything explain that as you're designing these different things, they all have to have that same value or those common denominators, and it's neat because they all have different purposes. So trying to consider how that's all going to work. I think tap handles are a perfect example of like the tangent of the beer cans, right? Like, those are two of the biggest facing things that the brewery is going to have outside of their brewery.
No, that's a great point. And I think just as we were discussing there, and thanks for that question, Tyler, because you're also discussing about how something's going to translate from a packaging, like a can label or a bottle label, to another element that's going to represent your brand. It's super useful, like when we're creating these can labels, to develop a system or develop building blocks, visual building blocks for you, Nick, it was like the kind of hexagon like cell shape, right, or pattern, and also like the sign, right? So that the horizontal, not horizontal, that's this way, the horizon, right?
Yeah.
Vertical. The sign, right?
Designers, by the way.
And yeah, I think.
That's the last time I checked.
Right. No, but then also like, right. So thinking of that, because if you have a successful individual brand, individual beer that becomes successful, like how are you going to make shirts, like to represent that? I mean, and we're talking about actual individual beers here, but I mean, how are you going to make like, hats or just coasters or, anything? So you want to be able to have elements that you can separate from that label that you could slap onto a shirt or a hat or a tap handle for that matter. Right. And so, and the same thing also with your core brand of your brewery, start developing these kind of building blocks so that when you go to design something new, you've got these key elements you can pull from, like, oh, let's pull this texture. Let's pull this like graphical element that we've used across these other things. Start really thinking forward in that way is really useful in the packaging format, especially.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you tapped on it too. It starts to talk about the brand voice. And when we use that at the very beginning, that might not be too visible on the cans, let's say, but in like, think of your social media and think of the verbiage or the copy that you're writing, even inside of your brewery, having some idea of how your brand talks, like what's their personality, right? So are they a little sassy? Are they a little, jovial, whatever it is? And that carries across in everything, how you write in your social media posts, how you write in maybe a blog, or maybe there's the way you describe your beer and the tasting notes. It's fun to involve the creative copy to be a partner to the creative, design of what you've done. And when they go hand in hand, I think that creates the brand that a consumer can now describe to a friend or recommend. I think that's the biggest point too, is I go off of recommendations. Like when someone tells me about a place, you think of the key elements of what they've said to you, of why, like goes back to your point, right? It's all about the why.
Yeah.
Why should I go there? What's in it for me? And when we think about the features, every brewery has that, right? You have your list and they can be completely exclusive to who you are. But the benefit of what it gives the consumer is really the tie, because they'll find that as they're reading, as they're looking at social media, as they're getting a recommendation, or if someone writes something on Yelp. Those are those connective things that I go, whoa, this place has everything and gotta go. I think we all know we'll drive miles to see a new brewery, but what other industry are we really doing that we'll make a day out of? It's really that.
No, absolutely. And I think that point you just mentioned, I've known of breweries that create each individual beer as a standalone brand. In developing a kind of persona, a voice for each individual beer that they create, if it's going to be something they package, they're going to put out onto a retail shelf. So, I mean, for instance, if you think of like a summertime blonde ale, and maybe you're a brewery that does a lot more like thick barrel aged, stouts, with like adjuncts in them or something, right? That blonde ale, like the voice you might use to market that would be a lot more lighthearted, a lot more summer oriented versus something that's gonna be thicker.
There you go.
So they actually created like a persona for each individual brand. And I mean, if you think of breweries doing stuff like Stone with the Arrogant Bastard, or like Firestone Walker with their 805, those obviously developed into their own brands over a long time, but they've taken it to an area where they developed a voice. And I say that because we're talking about that. If we're going back to the design of the label, you were just touching on the point of the description, right? So before you even design a label, you might have some of those voice or some of the descriptors or some of the kind of themes or like way you might want to market that to a customer. And that might help drive the way that the label is designed as well. And I think it's super important, especially for customers in a retail environment that aren't at the tap room, to get as much of that off the shelf as possible, right?
Yeah. You're making that mini store in other areas for them to kind of get the experience. I always start that conversation with the new client of what's the experience of your brand? Like, because to me, I think that's one of the most important things that's going to gravitate a consumer to it if you can really establish that. So I think you had a great point too, talking about maybe the brand of your brewery is flexible enough that each beer variety can play a little bit different. You know, maybe they're under the same umbrella, but like you said, if you had this, I know Trademark did this one called Queen Sass, or Sass Queen, I believe it's called. And it's, I believe it's a unique one with some rosé wine in it and something different. But the way it took a whole other level in its voice is really gravitating people to it and going like, wow, I got to check this out. What is that? You know, nice. And curiosity is one of the best hooks, you know, especially in beer.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd like to ask you a little bit, and I think this is a great maybe talking point, because this was all for just a core lineup of beers. So they're everyday beers that they sell on an everyday basis that is kind of repeatable to create this billboard. But this is just not really ignoring, but there's this whole large world of one-off sales, taproom sales, specialty releases, seasonal releases. And you've done a bit of that with the 14 Cannons example that you showed.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to maybe kind of explore the 14 Cannons example you had. Their logo was in like a kind of a ribbon banner down the center. But then there was all this area available for custom artwork. So how did you go about developing that series of specialty beers that would fit into their core product lineup, but was also a unique series? Like, how did you go about that, and how did that compare to the core series?
Yeah, even starting it, I was a little afraid they'd be too similar and they wouldn't have their own unique identity. And when we first sat down and they said, we're going to do this, of course, my mind starts spinning and you're thinking of 1,000 different things. But what was great was we were looking at what other breweries were doing. And there's this, it's almost like they were like blank walls. Imagine the cans were like blank concrete walls where street art or some unique art was added to it that gets to change differently, but it's more specific to the particular beer variety of that can. So that's where we started. And we said, well, if we design the most simplistic template that has the blank area for the unique illustration, I think that was a good starting point. And being that the ethos of our brand is pioneering, adventurous, and revolutionary, it kind of falls along with everything that they are. So when we did the designs, we just made sure that they were unique to the variety. So like the Hazy Winch became this beautiful like pirate woman on the top of deck of a pirate ship. She's surrounded by like luscious peaches because it's a peach IPA, and there's beautiful coins around there and a little parrot. So like it fits the brand, but it's totally unique to that particular beer variety. And then some of the other ones got more adventurous and more fire and more rebellious, right? So they were able to play a little bit different. And the art was all provided by, we art directed it to the same designer, which I think was key because each one's different, but like going back earlier, there's a common thread of style, variety, and little things like we put in. We wanted to make sure there were particular elements of the illustrations that almost looked like they were backlit by a light source. So that was another common thread. So even though the color changed, you saw that when you looked at all 5 of them. You're like, ooh, there's highlights of red and green and yellow and blue. So those were those things that bring them together, but allow them to be separate. But what's beautiful about it is they're just really artistic, and they don't have to say much because one, I don't think they're not core. And I'd be curious to know your difference between core and limited edition. But like, it's almost like you have this permission to play and be a little bit different with them.
Yeah.
But it was still very purposeful, that there was a brand strategy. They look like a series, and they can go anywhere out there. And as a family, they have a strength. They're more powerful as you put more next to them. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. From my perspective, seems to be a big thing just in general. I mean, there's not a whole lot of breweries that have a large core lineup. I think that's starting to change a bit, though. I think some breweries are more going to have everyday core beers. But I'm also thinking that developing a more cohesive, recognizable brand on the shelf, even for kind of one-off releases, I think is also super important. I talked to somebody who on Twitter that works at a bottle shop, and they said that their New England IPA section sold less than other sections, which you would think is surprising because of how popular New England IPAs, like hazy IPA styles, are.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, how chaotic that shelf was, if you go in there, like, how are you just going to pick one, right? So I'm sympathetic to the idea that, you need to put out a lot of releases, but then I also like to approach it almost like in a hybrid kind of way. Kind of like the examples we showed at the beginning that I had done for Immersion Brewing, where I like to develop at least some system that's repeatable elements that creates that cohesive branding. And then, like you did with the 14 Cannons, is leave an area for custom artwork to fit within. Because then, even if you stack up the cans next to each other, and even if there's some variance between the artwork styles, as long as you've got these same elements that match up across all those cans, you're going to start building that that brand recognition.
Exactly.
Which is super important. So then you can also do one-off releases that maybe you kind of flip it, right? So maybe you have a system where the bottom is like a white band and you've got this colorful artwork on top. Well, maybe you come up with a one-off or a seasonal, and maybe you flip it. Maybe the bottom band's a different color now, or maybe that's where the art is. And, so it creates a system to where you can start getting creative, but still fit within a recognizable brand, and each product can stack next to each other and create that recognized and like that brand ability there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we even like made sure it was connected to the core brand, because the core brand has 3, but the way they are, one's a 16, one's a 12 ounce. So you don't get the consistency in just the can size to continue what's going on in the core. So with the limited, it was slam dunk. You're like, same can size, 5 for the year. Make these. I think also too, like, want to make them collectible. Like, I see people keeping cans and like, showing them off, and all I do is like follow them on anytime someone posts it, one of the some beer blogs or whatever, and myself and the client always tack in and say, like, thank you for posting and how great. So things like that, and maybe even building a hashtag to go along with a particular release. So like when we did their Mexican cerveza, we called it Catorce, which is 14 in Spanish, but we called it Crush a Catorce hashtag. And we just put it out there in every bit of social media, hoping that little entity can live on its own, even though it's just fine under our brand, ethos. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. I mean, we touched on Instagram, like the ability to photograph is huge. And that brings up another story. I work with a small brewery that's in the Bay Area of California they're pretty much almost all sour and barrel aged. And they do the 750 milliliter, the big bottles. So they've kind of got this premium thing going on. And I helped them develop a label at first that was kind of in the style of a wine label, where we created a custom die cut shape for the label. So it had some really unique branding on the front of the bottle, very recognizable. But then we just basically spelled out the name of the beer and the style and the year. And that was the only thing that had changed between each bottle, was just the name of the beer. So it's kind of like a wine label in a way. And for a smaller brewery, in that style, because it's like a high-end look, it kind of mimics the wine shelf kind of. It works great. They were able to update the names themselves. They didn't have to come to me for a new label each time. and it had a really classy label that was recognizable. They got to a point where they started just where they decided that they would want to come out with a unique label for each one. And part of the problems it was from downfalls of the existing labels is while it was a great system, easy to do, affordable because they could do it themselves, was that they would have 4 different bottles on the shelf. And one of their customers would be like, hey, what's that beer? And they're like, oh, it's actually 4 up there, because they couldn't see the difference, right?
Yeah.
And then also talking about photography, because you're going to use that on your website, you're going to use that on sales sheets, you're going to use that on, obviously Instagram. But
yep.
If you're photographing the same bottle label over and over, but just the name changes, there's nothing interesting there to do. So you lose a lot of that marketing fodder and some of that like social media fodder because you don't really have much there. So they made an investment to do custom labels for each one. We held on to a lot of those elements that we had from the beginning. So we had a custom die cut, but just started doing custom artwork within a custom die cut shape. And now like they've sent me like a million pictures because they're just like, they like set them up in different scenes and they create themes for each bottle. And now like they're just like plastering it all over their websites. And like they've got this whole world opened up to them when it comes to marketing and branding that they didn't have before. And so the ability to photograph your products is something really big to consider.
Yeah,
for sure.
Oh, especially when you're like submitting it for particular retailers, they're going to want to have a great shot to put for their website, sales sheets as well. I mean, that's sometimes a great test before it goes to print, is that designers and brand owners combined can really review the series of how it's working in marketing materials. And you might catch that one little thing that like you can improve on just one touch more, and make it totally successful.
Yeah. Yeah. See, like you said, see how that fits on a sales sheet, or like see how it integrates with everything else that you've got already. Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Well, cool, man. I think we should wrap it up here. I appreciate everyone everyone who's hung out this long, and thanks for the question, Tyler. Really appreciate it. Nick, why don't you let people know where they can find you, what you got going on?
Great.
And then I'll close out this little session here.
Sure. Everything's available at either longodesigns.com. That's LONGO designs with an S. And you can follow me on Instagram as well, Longo Designs, right there. I'd love to hear from you. Any feedback, further questions, we're here for you guys. Yeah,
perfect. So I'll be sending out a link to everybody here that participated to give them. I wrote up a guide on 6 ways to save money on beer labels, and that comes from the design and from the printing aspects. So it's always good to save money there, right? So I got that PDF that I'll send everybody. There's a PDF that is kind of a branding checklist that I distilled some of the things we talked about here and created kind of a branding kind of checklist to create an outline. And then I kind of annotated, geez, wow. Each little talking point there to kind of, right. And so I'll be sending that out to everybody. If you do have any questions, definitely write, email Nick or myself. He just gave you his information. You can find me. I have the Branding Brews podcast. If you haven't listened to it, I'd love for you to check it out. I've got over 40 episodes. They're all about an hour long. They're all on specific topics around branding with other industry professionals and myself. That's at brandingbrews.com. And then if you'd like to check out any of my work, I'm at craftbrewcreative.com. And my email is ryan@craftbrewcreative.com. Any questions you've got, you'll hear from me. Like you can just reply to any emails, drop me an email. I'd love to kind of, answer any questions you've got around any of this stuff. So, I really appreciate everybody showing up. I'm going to try to do more of these. The podcast is great, but it's kind of more of a one-way thing. People don't get to see this side of it, like Nick and I talking here, which is really, I think, going to be fun. Yeah. And I'd love to get more interaction with folks out there. So, well, cool, Nick, man. Thanks again for doing this whole presentation. It was a lot of fun, dude.
Yeah, definitely great. And thanks for all the comments, you guys. We're seeing you kind of pop up now. Again, anything we can do to help you guys, even, finding designers out in your local area, whatever it takes, we're here to kind of help you guys out.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right.
Cool.
Well, thanks again. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. John, Rebecca, Nick, everybody. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. And we'll hopefully do this again soon.
Perfect.
All right. Cheers.